the countries that have taken steps to phase Huawei out of the RAN have made a bit of a song and dance about it. And, the UK is a classic example where we've had parliamentary sessions on it, and then rules about you have to go down to nothing by 2027 and you have to be at this percentage by 2025. And then you've had operators announcing they're using Ericsson instead, or they're going to do something with Open RAN. Whereas Germany, there was none of that.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. It's been a couple of weeks because of half term, was it? Yeah, just generally people having to live their lives.
Half term is coming.
Oh, what were you doing?
It was travel.
Someone couldn't do it last week. Was it you, Pierre?
I was at Cable Next Gen.
Oh, so you were working?
In Denver.
Okay, so he was off in the States. How was that?
It was erratic weather.
Erratic weather. Yeah, I imagine Denver in like early March can be like that.
One night it was 22 Celsius. Next morning it snowed.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Just mad.
I remember it being like that in Denver when the big 5G event was.
One of the things I didn't remember last time is that because it's so dry, the static is so annoying. So I would get shocked
all the time.
Every time I would touch my laptop, a doorknob, somebody.
It turns you into a nervous wreck, doesn't it?
It's just, I still have PTSD when I'm home. I'm like about to touch the doorknob.
It's like some fucking psychological experiment.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine if you got an electric shock every time you had a beer, Ian.
You'd be sober.
Yeah,
that'd be torture.
Yeah. Given my health, though, maybe.
Well, indeed. But, okay, all right. So that's why we didn't do one last week, sorry. But here we are. And we got a rare one where it's just the three of us.
We've got the special guest as the Yeti.
We've got the Yeti on the special guest spot. Well, actually, that's normally where I sit, where we have a special guest. But, yeah, it's so rare, Ian, that we get quality time together like this. Which is testament to the success of the podcast that we more often than not, and we never, most of the time they used to just be us.
Yeah.
But now, like after this, I've got a few people lined up to be on.
Some good people as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're all good people, obviously. No offence to anyone who's been on it before, on behalf of Ian. Who's making some kind of distinction. This lot are good.
Yeah, it's like good people for once. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, the thing that I enjoy about having it just us is obviously we're not constrained by any sort of subject matter, and we can just go off on one. Although this week's not the best week for that to happen because there's been fuck all news. But luckily it's been the first one for 2 weeks, so we might dip a bit further back into the news. But what have I been? Oh yeah, I should mention I'm a bit ahead of the game in terms of drink because I just had lunch with Mark from Plume. Hi, Mark.
Is he on the PR side, the comms side, Mark?
Yeah, he's in house, but he's on the comms side. And I'm just reminding myself, a nice chap from Axicom as well, Stephen. Sorry, Stephen, I forgot your name. So yeah, that was nice. They've got at the top of their office building, they got a restaurant, and we went up there, and I had some salmon to start, a bit of lamb.
Did they not invite me because I don't use their product?
Well, I did say to them that I'm bound to mention that I just had lunch with you, and I'm bound to bring it up with Ian, and I was reminded. So we've mentioned this on the pod before, but about, what was it, a couple of years ago, something like that, Plume sent us both their kit. So Plume, just for people who don't know, they make this sort of like
box.
What ostensibly, these sort of nodes that extend your Wi-Fi, but they do more than that. And if they were here, they'd be sort of correcting me now because there's all sorts of clever shit like cloud stuff and AI and actual human interaction. Where they sort of optimise it. I think I came up with when I was chatting to them, because I said to them, look, one of the mutual problems we all have is just trying to describe what the hell it is you do. One of the reasons I don't write about it that much is I'm just not sure what it is you do and why people should care. And that's not a diss.
Let's call them Wi-Fi boosters.
Well, yeah, but they would obviously insist it's a bit more than that. Because there is some cleverness involved, it is linked to the cloud, and the best word, they seem to go along with it. Although you're never quite sure when you're a journalist and you're talking to people on the comm side whether they're just accommodating you and going, oh well, at least he's not someone who's just started yesterday. I called it a cloud concierge service for your Wi-Fi. Sounds a bit wanky, but I was trying to think of a
They
way of
liked that,
describing well, they seem to think it more or less. In other words, it's constantly managed and optimized and all that sort of thing, and it knows what traffic's going on in your house. It knows what conflicting traffic there is with adjacent Wi-Fi and all that sort of thing. But the challenge they have is, why should anyone care? I mean, it's all very well them saying we optimize it, but if what they really do, their USP really is that it just works. And they're nearly all through the channel. They're nearly all through the operator channel. It's very rare that you would go to Curry's and buy one, although I think you could. Anyway, and I said, look, I'm about to talk this about to Ian about this. And I remember when you sent both of us that kit, Ian had one go at setting it up. He couldn't make it work, and he just went, fuck it. And I went, look, I know Ian, that's what he's like. He gets exasperated quickly.
Getting the Wi-Fi password here.
Yeah, exactly. Ian is, he's very patient in some ways, but he's got a certain threshold where if he feels impatient, it's absolute. It's just like, right, I can't bother anymore. I'm moving on. You've lost me. Anyway, and so I said to them, well, maybe they should try and re-engage with you. But I remember what happened, because I actually met Plume. I met this guy, Mark, who I just had lunch with. I met him in Barcelona, the one before this. And I said to them at the time, both me and Ian had this experience where the pain point was pairing the app and your phone with the little node, with the little device.
Yeah.
And I said, I persisted more than Ian, because I'm not as impatient as you, and I managed to sort it out. But I had plenty of sympathy for Ian, because it was enough of a frustration where you're entitled to just go, do you know what, bollocks, I can't be bothered.
Yeah.
So anyway, you might get some reach out.
It's funny.
Well, I think I'm probably not untypical of a certain section of consumers that they maybe need to think about.
Yeah, totally.
Who like, probably my dad's very similar, maybe even worse than I am. He gets something like that and he'd give it one or two tries, and that would be it.
I think you should become like a famous tech consumer reviewer.
Yeah, like
has
it
it passed?
passes the Ian test.
Correct.
Yeah.
The grumpy dinosaur. test sort of
But
thing,
to be honest, the funny thing about it is when I mentioned it to them at Mobile Congress 22, and we both had that same problem, they were genuinely surprised. And it wasn't just Mark, it was one of the co-founders. And, as a journalist, you learn to try and read whether people are bullshitting you.
Yeah.
And I think they were genuinely surprised.
Right.
So, obviously, if it happened to lots of people, that they would have a massive incentive to deal with it. But for some reason, it might have even been the kit.
Well, I find, because it's through Bluetooth, isn't it, that you're doing that bit?
That's right.
And I don't think that's a very reliable technology.
Right.
Is it?
Well,
Bluetooth?
that's
haven't you
that's
ever
a bit of
bought
feedback for
cheap
you, Mark?
headphones where you've not been able to get them to link to the device?
Yeah,
And
it can be a bit.
it's a bit of a
hit and
shitty
miss.
technology,
Yeah.
Bluetooth, to be honest with you. I
Anyway.
know Eric Eckert at Ericsson was talking it up as something that they were involved in the early days, but
Right, very well. It wasn't. Didn't it get its name from some Viking?
yeah, because I think Harold Bluetooth was a Viking who united a lot of tribes.
I see.
So
And
the
that
idea
was the
is that-
tenuous link.
Yeah, the
Wait,
idea that,
hold on. This is where the name comes from?
yeah, the name Bluetooth was named
It was
after.
invented by some
it's named after like
Scando.
some 9th or 10th century Viking.
Yeah, like
who
Redbeard.
was- Yeah.
But it wasn't spelled that way, was it?
Basically,
Well,
if you're a
it's Danish,
Viking,
or it would be Danish or Swedish, but it translates as Harold Bluetooth.
if you're looking for a name as a Viking, you've got to pick a colour and pick a part of your body. That's how it works. Sort of Eric Orange Balls.
Or call yourself Unready or something.
Yeah, Ethelred. Yeah.
He was Saxon, though, wasn't he? I think.
Well,
So
there we
I'm
are.
quite
They're
safe,
adjacent.
but-
They're Viking adjacent.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's that. But I said I'd mention it, and I told them, and they said, I wonder what Ian will think. And I went, well, just listen to the pod on Monday, and you'll know what he thinks.
I'll be nice to them now, though, because I'm sort of blaming it on the Bluetooth side of it. And
I think, I mean, if they'd obviously be only too happy to read. I did explain to them that it's not really your core area of writing, that you tend to write.
It's not.
You tend to write mischievous shit about bigger sort of telecoms industry topics, but nonetheless, I'm sure they'd want you to have a positive experience with it. And I'll honestly say, I'm not just saying this because they just got me lunch, and I'm a bit ahead of the game. I had a pint of neck oil and a big glass of Malbec.
Nice.
So if I start talking shit even sooner than usual, that'll be the reason. But yeah, I've had a generally positive experience, and I just switched. In fact, this will lead on to our first topic in a bit. I just switched providers from E to BT, which you could say is the same, but I switched from fibre to the cabinet to full fibre.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
What kind of speed bump was that?
About 4 times, from about 25 megs to 100 megs, but I could have paid for a lot more.
You were surviving with 2 kids, 2 teenagers on 25 megs down?
Yeah.
How?
Well, turns out we
He lives
were
in
miserable.
Hitchin, so there's only like 3 people there using the same, in the same neighbourhood.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and one connected sheep.
So you don't get any of that congestion you get on Swaffield Road or Astonville Road. It is Astonville, isn't it?
Don't tell everyone.
They're going to come round and raid your property. And
Exactly. Now he's got to move house. Nice one. Yeah, which incidentally is one of the things that Plume claims it deals with,
Right.
is adjacent.
Well, maybe I should
congestion.
try and not be as impatient. And
Well, it's up to you. I'm not compelled, even though they just bought me a nice lunch, to advocate on behalf of Plume. But
Yeah.
I mean, what have you got to lose?
this is true.
What was I going to say? Yeah, and I switched. And another thing in favour of Plume, because you basically connect the core bit of Plume. You connect it via Ethernet to your router.
Yeah.
And so I got a new router for this new BT FTTH service. But then all I had to do was plug in the Plume. I didn't have to reconfigure it or do anything like that. It just worked it all out.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Does
that's
that mean
it.
you have to,
That's
like-
enough. I think I've earned my lunch, Plume, haven't I?
Does that mean you have to repair everything?
If they
though?
want any more, it's got to be a dinner and a strip joint. No, only joking.
You have a new Wi-Fi name, new password. You have to
No, none of that.
So you want
Oh,
a
it's the
small
same.
number.
You just go back to Plume as your hotspot.
Oh, so your devices are connected to the Plume thing.
That's
not...
right.
Ah, okay.
That's right.
You want to have a very small number now of fibre to the home users in the country, you realise. It's quite
Right.
a select group. Because even though it's widely deployed, nobody uses it.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. I was kind of expecting them to try and do something under the road, but they connected it from a pole.
Right. Did they have to come and faff around a lot? in
They
your
did
house?
have to, and they had to drill a hole in my
Right.
wall. But it was all right. I mean, in fact, this will lead on to, I don't know. Actually, yeah, we can talk about this because it doesn't get ahead of the main topic. Our sort of personal experiences of it. What happened was it's probably after a pod, I was a bit pissed and I was going home about midnight from St Pancras station, and like a complete idiot, I left my phone on the seat when I got on the train. And then I managed to get a train back from Finsbury Park, and by the time I got there, it had been nicked and someone just left the case, which is weird. And so I just...
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think
So I don't like the case. No.
I know it is weird. I think what they wanted to do was probably get the SIM card out sharpish for traceability. That's my guess.
Yeah. Was the
and
SIM
then,
card then lying around somewhere?
Can you
not
even-
that I saw, but it probably was if I'd cared to look for it.
Can you even unlock a modern smartphone without the fingerprint and all that stuff? You
No,
couldn't.
but you can get into the SIM tray with one of those little pokey things.
Okay, yeah, but then how can you use the phone after?
Oh, I see.
have to
There are
hack it.
probably
Well, maybe
ways in which
there's
there are probably
ways of
ways in which you
engineering
can hardwire it and do a factory reboot. So they wouldn't get access to any of my shit. They couldn't get that, but they could do a hard factory reset.
I thought it would ask for a password before it does that. No.
Don't know. I reckon there are probably
That's a good
ways.
question for handset makers.
Yeah.
Usually it's
Isn't it?
locked, or
I
you can
think.
brick an iPhone. I know that you can completely dead it.
Well, you can do a factory reset. What you can't do is gain access to it as the user left it. You have to go back to factory settings.
Did you phone up though and try and get everything cancelled immediately? Because it's a bit
No,
unnerving
I didn't.
if you're using it for payments.
I didn't.
and stuff.
I let Informer know because I get my email on it. I didn't
Right.
want to get sacked for someone
Yeah.
sending dodgy emails on my behalf. But I was instinctively quite confident because it's either PIN number or fingerprint or facial recognition. In fact, my old phone didn't even have facial recognition. But either way, I don't think you can hack any of those. So I wasn't really worried about someone getting access to my mobile banking or my work email or Gmail or whatever.
Yeah.
Or my litany of porn sites. No, I'm joking. But yeah, I was still a little bit. I was just reminded of just how much you have invested in your phone, and when
Yeah.
it's in the hands of someone malicious, how sort of exposed you feel. Anyway, nothing bad's happened so far. Fingers crossed. And I quickly went off and bought a new Pixel just straight from Google. But I needed
How
to
much
get
was that?
£600.
You have the premium one, top one.
Yeah, not the Pro, but this is just the Pixel 7, but it's the latest Pixel.
It's
And
the one where you can delete people from a picture.
right, yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's true.
Which will be handy if I ever
Seriously? You can take a photo and get rid of
taken with
somebody?
you.
Yeah,
That's slightly
it's
sinister.
the buzzword AI.
Oh, Christ.
Well, that's one of the few differentiators they can have with smartphones now is camera tech,
Yeah.
because all the rest of it's just sort of commoditized, isn't it? Anyway, and I went into EE the next day just to get a new SIM card. And then while I was there was a very helpful guy. I forget his name now, but I wrote to our contact within BT just to name him and say this bloke was really fucking helpful. And not only did he improve my SIM-only contract that I got with them, because what I do, I've said it before on the pod, I get a bunch of data for myself and then I gift it to the rest of my family. So my kids are on a really fuck all a month contract.
Yeah, same.
But then he also had a look at my broadband and realised that I hadn't. You know, with all utilities, if you don't look at it regularly, you're paying some legacy shitty rate.
Yeah.
And he basically went, you're on EE broadband right now, which is on 25 megs. FTTC, presumably.
Yeah.
Because it certainly came in through the phone cable, not a dedicated fibre cable. Said you could get onto BT at a minimum of 100 for less. So I was like, fuck it, I'll do that.
Well, I'm glad you had a positive experience because I had a negative experience with BT
tell me.
EE this week. EE phoned me up about a smartphone upgrade because I think it's June it's due, which is fairly soon. And they
figured before then you would have baked your phone anyway.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So they went,
Sir, don't do this.
And I said, well, I actually want to spend less money and go SIM only when it comes up for renewal because phones are rubbish. It's a waste of money. You put my prices up already by about 13 quid a month, so it's now £70 a month I'm paying. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. We can do that for you as well. Why don't you come into the store on Saturday morning? Booked an appointment, went into the store. By the way, while all this was going on, I'm still getting phone calls from other bits of EE asking me about upgrading, even after I booked the appointment, which is quite frustrating.
I've got an addition to my experience that augments what you just said.
And then the woman at the store was really, really helpful. And but she did say the first thing she said pretty much was we can't do a SIM upgrade until it's June, which is kind of the whole reason for going in.
So why? And they'd invited you,
and they'd invited me in.
It's not like you just turned up.
It wasn't a hassle because it's literally I live so close to that EE store, and I was going to the shopping centre anyway. And then she said, do you get your broadband from us as well? And it was like, well, it's BT, but it's basically the same because she knew that. Some of them don't actually seem to know that they probably do nowadays. They didn't used to, but she's like, well, how much are you spending? Because we can reduce that. Which this is good customer service that they're doing that sort of thing. And I was like, it's about 40 a month. And she's like, well, we can move you onto a BT business account, which it seems like a viable thing to do, even though
you work from home.
I do work from home, I suppose. So yeah, small office, home office, and all that rubbish.
Soho.
And you
work from Soho.
Soho, yeah. And you'd be paying 20 quid a month. So this guy will phone you up in the afternoon about it. No phone call at all. So, and it's now. That was the weekend. We're now Thursday. So
that's where that's the only negative experience I had with my anecdote is this very helpful person in the shop sorted it all out, and then. The reason it's relevant to your experience is BT's still a bit disjointed. It's still trying to fully assimilate the EE, the BT, and all that sort of thing.
I think that's really shit, I have to say.
Well, they've had a while.
Organisationally, we don't do consumer reviews and which style articles, but looking at it strategically, for this stuff still to be going on, you're getting repeat phone calls from different sort of customer service people. You're getting someone saying they're going to phone you up and they don't. You're getting told that you can upgrade and you can't. Yeah, it's just
I agree
a mess.
That's bad. And my experience
really
was so it was OpenReach, which is going to be our main segment when we eventually get there. Yeah. Here am I trying to time manage, and we've been going on for 20 minutes.
Kind of related to that.
So it was OpenReach actually doing the FTTH installation, which required drilling a new hole into my house and basically getting a bit of fibre. For some reason I was expecting through the ground. I just always imagined fibre through the ground, but this was from a pole, from the nearby telephone pole.
You have that near you, don't you?
And but the first appointment was made, I think, just before Mobile World Congress, and they just never turned up.
Right.
There wasn't even an explanation. They'd been spamming me with these text messages going, we're going to turn up, make sure you're there. Yeah. And then they just fucking blew me out.
Yeah. That seems to be quite common when it comes to deliveries these days, I've noticed. And maybe a bit more, that's really frustrating if you stay at home, especially. But it seems to be a widespread thing, even with actually the likes of Amazon now have been a bit unreliable sometimes.
Well, what Amazon does is they just don't ring the doorbell and they just lob it somewhere in the front of the house.
Yeah. Although we've chucked it behind the bins, or it's with the neighbour that you don't like who'll nick it and destroy it.
Neighbour with a problem child.
Yeah, but
and an aggressive
I just think
dog.
BT should be better at doing the after years of
they still could have joined it up better.
Trying to. I mean, this is a long time since the EE takeover happened. Let's be honest, it's a really, 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 really long time.
Yeah,
that was 2012. That's 11 years ago that they bought EE.
No,
right?
It was more recent than that.
No, it wasn't. It's 20.
I'm sure it's since I've started doing this job.
You're right. It's 2016. Sorry.
Yeah.
2016. So that's still a long time ago. 2016 is years ago.
7 years.
And for this still to be going on, and to have people saying they're going to phone you and they don't, and you get promised something and then it doesn't materialise. It's just really shit.
And the fact that they're still
service.
selling against each other. Another thing that I found surprising about
Should we get Mark Alera on then?
Well,
Yeah,
this is his bit. I'm sorry, but it is really, really shit. As a service company, and it's really shit.
We should get Mark on. I had a brief but good chat with him in Barcelona. And he's welcome to come on, or Howard, or any of those C-suite.
And he might say if we got him in, it's an isolated incident. It doesn't generally happen like that. There's a small percentage, but I bet that's crap. I bet if you talk to a lot of EE customers,
Scott and I are
100% example so far out of the pool that we've talked to, which is two people.
I'll give him my pitch, Mark. If you come on, we're going to spend an hour giving you anecdotal grief about personal shitty experiences. But one thing,
a proper survey would deliver a very high percentage of people who have this experience. Well, I bet you anything.
What I think, so my net experience is very positive, bar that one OpenReach lapse. My net experience was positive, but I still found it remarkable that I was in an EE shop and he was upselling me BT broadband, when my understanding, and this is a Mark Alera thing, is that they've tried to rationalise the brands to make EE the consumer-facing one and BT the B2B one.
Yeah.
So why am I in a shop on a high street as a consumer being sold BT by an EE person?
They were like, you're Scott Biceno, the Telecoms.com.
No, they didn't know that. The bloke didn't know me from Adam.
Do you know what the other thing that they've done I think is really stupid is this, this consumer price index plus 3.9% mechanism they've got, which is not just unique to BT. This is all the telecom companies apply that formula, don't they? I mean, the word cartel springs to mind here, but we'll leave that aside.
Yeah.
How come they've all decided on 3.9% plus the rate of inflation? But I mean, that's very dodgy anyway. I think that whole. I'd really like to look into that more. If I was that kind of, investigating consumer prices, how they've come up with that, it would be quite interesting. But
the problem with the 3.9 come from?
But this is the thing. But I mean, I did talk to an analyst who I won't name because it might be a bit embarrassing for him now. But I did talk to an analyst about where does the 3.9% come from, and he said, well, they probably calculated that back when inflation was 0.5%, 1%, and that they needed to have some kind of increase to justify. Increased expenditure and investment and all that sort of thing. But it's not that anymore. So it's a huge step up. I mean, I've gone up to from 60 to 70 quid a month, basically.
Although you could argue if inflation is 10%, then it affects everyone. So the 3.9% is the whole point of it. That is an increase in their revenue, and that everything to do with inflation is just written off by the cost of energy, the cost of wages, the cost of whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but if they're putting it up by what that comes out at 14%, I mean nobody they're basically squeezing consumers, aren't they?
It feels like it as a consumer,
because nobody's wages are going up at 14%. So
certainly not.
And I don't know anybody who's had a 14% pay rise based on cost of living.
No,
I really don't. And so here's the stupid thing that I think is that what will happen as a result of them doing that is that people will shop around and go. People who weren't thinking of going SIM only or looking for competitive deals will move on to all sorts of cheaper packages when the opportunity comes up to downgrade, and I think it'll hurt them in the long run.
Yep. Cool. All right. We've witted. Yeah. Pierre, you had a personal broadband anecdote. Do you want to share it, or are you still keeping your cards close to your chest on that one?
No, it's not very interesting. It's just that I'm probably going to switch from whoever I'm with right now to one of the fiber people.
Okay, he's being so discreet.
Yes, what?
No.
Slacking off Mark Alera, and you can't even be bothered to.
He's not a journalist, is he?
I'll just give the figures.
Less gobshite than
I will go from 49 to 27 per month.
Wow.
And I will go from 120 megs down to 920 megs.
Wow.
So half price almost.
No-brainer,
isn't it? And 8 times the speed.
So I suppose the moral of the story is keep shopping around.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the same with all utilities. We all end up paying over the odds. That's why people like sort of go compare the market or whoever's got the opera singer or whatever. Yeah, all those people. That's why they exist, because with utilities especially, but also like financial services, like insurance, if you just allow it to roll, like car insurance, they always take the
goes
piss
up.
every year.
Yeah.
They take the piss. My car's a year older. Why is the insurance more?
Yeah, but people start to care about that more when they do ridiculous things like putting prices up by 14%.
Totally.
You know,
Yeah. So we've all just got to stay on our toes. It's just such a drag.
Really
It's just like the weekend comes and you're thinking, last thing I want to do
is go compare,
be price comparing with some fucking rodent or an opera
no,
singer.
You want breakfast in bed watching movies all day.
Yeah, or be dabbing your hungover, fevered brow.
Is a meerkat a rodent?
Probably not. Probably not. It's more like a ferret, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
in that area. I don't know what they are. They're not rodents.
You know, they
so-
had to tone down the whole like Russian part of it. You know?
Right.
Did they?
'Cause
That's
he was
disappointing. I know
Sergei.
he's got yeah.
Do you know what? A complete tangent, and then I'll get to the point. I know you're really into tennis, Ian. I don't know if you saw on BBC Sport website. There's a Belarusian female player called Sabalenka.
Yeah, she's been getting abuse in the locker room.
She's been getting
apparently.
fucking bullshit in the locker room. And, you know, we've spoken about on the pod how absurd it was, not least with Wimbledon, but other sort of arbitrary banning of anything like you can't
Well, she
eat,
said it wasn't from
you can't
other
eat
players.
a pavlova for pudding or whatever.
It wasn't from other players. It was from members of the training teams of other players.
Yeah, from their
That's the thing.
entourage.
Yeah.
But that will have been born of this uniform Russia equals bad.
Yeah.
That
Well,
just, you know, they were, banning meerkats, banning...
But I don't know, another thing you noticed,
Russian
one of the
opera.
Russian players got into trouble for wearing a Spartak Moscow football top
Because that was too Russian.
because it was too Russian. And I thought, well, are they going to get into trouble for listening to Tchaikovsky on their headphones before they go and play a match or something?
Totally. It's
You
so
know,
irrational.
Or reading Dostoevsky or whatever.
It's so irrational. And the thing that bothers me about it, I've got no skin in the game regarding Russia specifically, but it's bigoted. People always go on about bigotry. If you look up the definition of bigotry, it is just this sort of irrational or excessive bias against one group.
Yeah.
It's clearly bigoted towards Russians. Sabalenka, the Belarusian female tennis player, wasn't involved in the invasion
No,
of
she probably doesn't
Ukraine.
even live in Belarus. They all live in Monte Carlo, the tennis players.
Do you know,
anyway.
it's bigoted. It's bigoted in its collective punishment, and I think we can all agree that collective punishment's bad.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right.
I think it's good that they go after the oligarchs, though, because they're clearly
Oh, yeah.
somewhat involved.
That's different.
Yeah, they're
That's
part of the
different, though.
system.
But-
Anyway,
They're part of the system. Okay, that was a long load of bullshit. So
There was a lot of telecom relevant stuff. in
yeah,
all
there was
that, though.
telecoms-y stuff
I
there.
think we can close it out here.
Yeah. Right. What are we going to chat? Oh, yeah. Shall I try and remember to do my thing that if you're watching this on the website or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can also listen to it on iTunes,
If you're still
SoundCloud,
watching it.
Spotify. Yeah, if you're still listening. This will be like, I got a colleague who goes, I've got a colleague I was chatting to who's going, Scott, maybe if you just shorten the initial bullshit bit. I was going, okay, I'll look at that. Well, sorry, mate. We just spent half an hour talking shit. I tried. Well, I didn't really try. That's a lie. Okay. Anyway, yes. So, what are we going to talk about? So this week's been a little bit quiet, but the last 2 weeks there's been some more interesting stuff going on. In fact, there's one thing talking about cutting short the initial bullshit. I've got one more bit of initial bullshit that I want to say. In fact, it's born of an email that we got that the subject field was complete bullshit 5 exclamation marks. So this is a bit of feedback. So on Telecoms.com, our most read story over the last couple of weeks was one of those surprising ones that went viral for reasons that weren't obvious before we published it. Written by Mary, called "Falling Prices in Canada to Impact Rogers Shaw Merger." So there's a big mega merger that's been going through the usual channels of
It's been going on
regulation
for
and
years,
approval.
that thing.
Yeah, between two of the biggest CSPs in Canada called Rogers and Shaw. And she just wrote a piece where there was some bit of analysis. Actually, I've got it here. Apparently there's sort of price deflation in terms of mobile services in Canada, and she was going, that might bode well for that merger, because the real reason, one of the biggest reasons that mega mergers in telecoms don't happen is that the regulators think it will be bad for consumers in terms of price inflation, and so if price is naturally deflating, then maybe that offsets that consideration. So that was her conjecture in the piece. I thought, yeah, fair enough, write that up, but I didn't expect that much of it. Anyway, it went kind of viral. And there are a few comments on the bottom of it. It's clearly all just Canadians who apparently, feel quite strongly about their CSPs over there. I think they've got quite limited choice.
They have the big
Well, it's
three
funny.
in
Yeah.
Canada.
To go back to what we started at the beginning, and you're complaining about £70 a month and stuff. Talking to our American colleagues last week, they would be laughing like, this is nothing.
They pay a lot in the
They
States,
pay
don't
crazy amounts. Insane.
Yeah, but they make a lot of money and they don't pay any tax in Texas.
they? Well, there is that. I mean,
There's
yeah.
no income taxes.
Some-
in
Yeah,
Texas.
they pay other taxes.
No,
Yeah,
I mean-
but not very much.
No, I'd say the average sort of income for a Yank is higher than the average Brit.
And they don't pay any taxes.
And then
They all move to the Midwest these days. That's the trend,
Yeah.
is to move out of California where the taxes are high to places in the country where you don't have to pay any tax. It's like
California's
everybody.
like
It's like
fucking
Manchester
Sweden.
saying if you move to Manchester you don't have to pay income tax. Everybody bundle over to Manchester.
No,
wouldn't
well,
they?
I mean, we know
So-
Austin's a massive influx of people. One day, Pierre, we'll go. I think Rogan's just opened his club in Austin.
Oh yeah, well we're going in.
We
May.
went there.
Oh, you're going, aren't you,
No,
you
no, no.
bastards?
We didn't go into it
We
last
we
time.
went to the bar across the street. At the time, it wasn't anything.
No. So do you think you're going to get? I mean, you can give a plug. What is it you're going to in May?
Big 5G event. I think
Yeah.
I'm going.
Yeah,
It's not
15,
100% yet.
16,
And you're
17th.
almost certainly going to do your video
He's definitely
shizzle.
going.
Yeah, it's.
And do you think you're going to get a chance to go to Rogan's club?
I don't know. Let's try to buy a ticket.
We got-
maybe.
We were. I remember going last time, and we were sort of
Yeah, but
slight outcasts for going to walk past Joe Rogan's place because he's obviously not.
No, but it was-
popular.
He's a
was
Nazi.
I didn't want to say that, but yeah.
well,
that was the perception.
anyone who's not. I mean, it's so polarised in the States. Anyone who's not there is got to be over there. There's
I
nowhere
can't
in the
remember who
middle.
It wasn't someone on the light reading team, but it was someone kind of connected to the light reading team that was sort of having a go at us for going past the Joe Rogan place
Right.
and wanting to go up there.
Oh well, I mean, yeah,
Um,
that we have it. I won't name them, but I've got colleagues who are clearly on one side of the fence where I'm on another,
yeah.
and it's just funny. I mean, I quite enjoy the discourse when it
Yeah.
happens, but people can get
Well,
fucking worked up.
I've
about
never
it,
even
so-
listened to a Joe Rogan podcast. I just thought I know
Yeah.
who he is. Why not walk up there and get
Well,
a beer or
Christ,
something?
That's funny
But-
that you got some looks. Anyway, what was I going to say? Why did I get onto that tangent?
because you were talking about
Taxes.
Oh yeah, no, talking about because they pay a lot more for stuff there. So there doesn't seem to be much choice in Canada, and so you can see why lots of Canadians are worried about there being even more consolidation. And I got some
There's Bell Canada, Telus, and Rogers.
right. And what's Shaw?
Well, Shaw's a cable operator, as I
Right.
understand it. So the merge is partly about them getting hold of some fixed line cable assets. Although they have tried to sell it in the past on the basis of it would speed up our 5G rollout, which is slightly kind of flawed logic for the deal. But I haven't, to be honest, I haven't looked at the details of it for a long time. I've written about it a couple of times,
Yeah.
but it's going
Yeah,
back
well,
a year or two.
But you wouldn't necessarily expect if you did write it up for it to get lots of reads, would you?
No.
And yet this one did. We had a few people in the comments. I won't read the
They're
comments
pissed
out.
off, huh? I'm reading them.
Right. Okay. So you can see some comments. Well, wait till you hear this email because you won't have seen this. So this is an email sent from someone called Peter Quinn, who's actually I won't say his email address in case on the unlikely event someone sends him some bullshit and I get the blame. But he's called Peter Quinn, and the subject field is complete bullshit. 5 exclamation marks.
Well, he's angry.
Well, yeah. Well done.
Were
Sigmund.
they emboldened exclamation marks as well?
Well, I don't think you can bold
And
a subject
underlined.
field.
Yeah.
And then he goes, and then it's quite short. The body copy is, yeah, those telecom rates are really falling, sort of crying face, crying emoji. Gee, a site devoted to telecoms tells us the prices are falling. Actual reality, Canadian telecoms are basically just criminal organisations, Rogers being the fuck you leader. And then he signed it off, eat shit.
Okay, he's a lot unhappier
What an amazingly
than I
obnoxious
am
thing
with
to do.
BT, isn't he? Clearly.
I mean,
So I'm
just to tell someone completely randomly to eat shit. Anyway, it just made me laugh. I forwarded it to Mary,
He's probably a fan.
the author, and,
She
and
found that funny.
she said excellent. Well, actually, I won't betray her confidence. She didn't say anything particularly spicy, but she sent an email to me. I'm not going to read it out on the pod, but. Anyway, that was just a funny thing. So, but what we can talk about, that's not the main thing we can talk about, believe it or not, a full half hour or so into the pod. What we're going to lead off with is quite telecoms-y stuff, and it is related a little bit to what we were talking about before. There have been 2 or 3 related stories. One to do with OpenReach and them maybe getting in trouble with Ofcom, at least in part because of some unguarded comments that their CEO made to the FT. There's also a rumour, which hasn't been substantiated, to the best of my knowledge, about who is it buying City
Virgin
Fibre?
Media O2
Virgin Media,
buying City
VMO2
Fibre.
buying City Fibre. There it is. I've got the story up.
Yeah.
Which was at the start of this week. And I suppose the broader topic is just the UK sort of fibre environment. So one thing I'll head off on, I've been talking for a while, so I'll just cue it up and then I'll hand it over to you, Ian, is the reason this FT interview was interesting, that Philip Janssen, the CEO of BT, which, you know, Openreach is supposedly autonomous from BT as per some fucking around they did a few years ago, but it's obviously not.
Yeah.
And no one thought it at the time anyway. They just had to sort of put up some kind of facade. But basically he sounded really belligerent and really aggressive and really like we're going to
in his
crush.
letter?
In his
Oh,
interview with the
comments,
FT.
yeah.
And that's what got him in trouble. So maybe we'll just start with that. Did you write that up? I know you and I chatted about it.
I did, yeah.
Go ahead then. You take the ball.
I wrote it up a couple of days afterwards and took a sort of angle where I tried to look at some of the underlying data and trends and put it in a bit of context, I suppose. But I mean, his pushback, yeah, okay, I suppose he had a point that some of the remarks, you could say, there were selective quotes where there was more around them. I think there were qualifiers around them. On the other hand, I think in the FT's defence, they weren't really changing the meaning that much, you know. And he's been quite aggressive in his discussions in the past, I think, about fibre competition in the UK.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my angles actually really for this was I think he's in quite an awkward position when he has to talk about this subject because, you know, on the one hand, BT has withdrawn from TV, right? Their global services business is a lot smaller than it used to be because they've sold assets. They had some accounting problems in Italy a few years ago. You know, and essentially they're a lot more dependent now on infrastructure and fibre rollout and broadband in the UK for their future revenues and profit than they were in the past. And so if he goes on investor calls and speaks to analysts and speaks to journalists and gives the impression that they're in trouble and they're losing market share, it's really bad for the stock, which has already come down a huge amount, by the way, the BT stock in the last 5 years. But he's got to be quite careful that he doesn't take it to the point where he's suggesting that we're carrying the BT monopoly of old into the fibre age. You know? And it's I think it's quite a difficult kind of tightrope to do for him. And so I've got some sympathy. And I
have sympathy, just to briefly interrupt, I've fired up the FT bit. So it's written by their main telecoms correspondent, I believe, called Anna Gross. I've never met her. I was at a BT dinner with her.
I've been to Prestige where she's been there at dinner, but I've not actually
I haven't spoken to her. No. She was there on an adjacent table, but she was on the proper grown-up table, whereas I was on a sort of peripheral table, chatting to Paul Nolan and George Malin.
Yeah, well, you were happy doing that anyway.
Well, I was perfectly happy. So I've been in the same room with her, but I've never met her. But, you know, if she's the FT's telecoms lead, then obviously she's a credentialed proper journalist. But I get the impression that she's like old school and that she's quite headline chasing, which I don't mean as a fellow journalist. I don't mean as a criticism, but it's one MO. I'm slightly less so, and my only criticism of her, or at least how it was published, it might not even been how she wrote it, because when you're in a big place like the FT, you don't tend to write your own headlines, and you've got sub-editors fucking about with your stuff.
It's probably a sub-editor who did the headline, I suspect.
Yeah. So the headline was BT chief warns Openreach fibre push will, quote, end in tears, close quote, for rivals. So that's quite spicy.
Yeah. And
then the first paragraph says, BT's chief executive said the telecoms group has turned its broadband network into a quote unstoppable machine, close quote, that will ultimately, quote, end in tears, close quote, for many of its fibre competitors. And then the second paragraph, which is the one I've got the biggest issue with myself, is just in isolation as a paragraph. Quote, there is only going to be one national network, close quote, Philip Janssen told the Financial Times. And then new quote, why do you need to have multiple providers, close quote. Now, the reason I got an issue with that, and he said all those things, and this isn't a go at the FT or Anna specifically. This is just me being balanced. And this is more a sort of inside baseball journalist thing than it is a telecoms thing for me. Those two things are there positioned by themselves and unqualified. And we'll get into this, and I'll shut up in a sec. You know, he basically after this, he's kind of shat himself and wrote a letter to Melanie Dawes, who heads up Ofcom, and it's like, look, can you just take that with a pinch of salt?
Yeah.
And she sort of wrote back going, well, you still said it. But the way I have sympathy is, each of those quotes that the FT has published in isolation were in response to specific questions. And the fact that those questions are not put in that context, and to be fair to the FT, further down, they do provide context. But in those initial 2 paragraphs, they just got the most juicy quotes in complete isolation and without context. And the context, my understanding, there's only been one national network he was trying to say, and this is clumsily, and this is, I'll invite you to push back because I'm not totally sympathetic towards him. He meant there's going to be only one national in uppercase network, i.e. only one network that's truly national.
Yeah.
But clumsily phrased. And then just to finish, and then I'll shut up. And then why do you need to have multiple providers, as apparently said in the context of specific CSPs who use a wholesaler? Why do you need to have multiple wholesalers if you're a CSP, is what he said. Anyway, now I'll shut up.
think you should have multiple wholesalers. I mean, that's the whole point of the OpenReach thing. I mean, I don't... Yeah, and I did see his pushback, and I thought some of the points he was making were, I suppose, if you put them in surrounding, in the full context and included the other things he said along with them, it would have softened the tone a little bit. But I don't think it would necessarily change the meaning as much as maybe he's hoping. And
no, I agree with you
if
on
I'm going to
be,
I mean, this is a bit off topic, but if I'm going to be sort of defending Anna Gross at the FT, it's difficult for journalists because, you do these interviews and people waffle on with their answers for a long, long time, and anything's slightly taken out of context because you don't publish the whole quote.
Fair point. And you've got to extract
You've got to
juiciest
extrapolate,
bits.
and you're writing a 400, 500 word story and you want people to read it. If you put everything Philip Janssen said down in that call he had with the FT, it's probably 2,000 or 3,000 words. I don't know how long she had on the phone with him, but... And people are going to be bored. That's what journalists do. They try and pick out things that are interesting. So,
100%.
I mean, I was quite sympathetic towards it because I've been on investor calls with him in the past, and he's speaking to analysts then, and he's pretty sort of. I wouldn't expect him to be otherwise, by the way. Look, BT is trying to build a network and see off the competition, so it's up to the regulator to decide what to do.
Technically, OpenReach is building
OpenReach is, but it's part of his company. He's still the boss of the whole thing. I mean, I pulled one thing he said last July, which I wrote a story on, and if I was more important than Anna Gross, he'd probably been complaining about me, but I'm less
you get plenty of complaints.
So
you can't complain
I do,
about the amount of complaints
not generally at that level of people writing letters to Ofcom about me.
No, that's true.
But
that would be a feather in your cap.
Yeah, it would.
Anna must be dining out on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's had an impact, so she's probably quite pleased, I would imagine. But he said this last July. He said everyone's realising there'll be a lot of trouble for some of the altnets. If you add up everyone's ambition, their stated aims, the amount of money being raised, it is clear a lot of people won't make it. And he's saying this to analysts, banking analysts, and clearly he doesn't want to go and say to them, "Oh yeah, we're going to lose market share," because then BT's share price, which is already worth probably a quarter of what it was 5 years ago, I don't know, but it's gone down a lot, hasn't it? It's going to suffer more. I think the difficult thing for me for this whole, because the whole thing's about the whole topic at the moment. I think why this was of interest to Melanie Dawes at Ofcom is because there's this consultation going on into this thing called Equinox 2.
That's right.
Which sounds like some sort of druid summer solstice type thing, but it's actually BT's.
Or an 80s French electronic music person. What was that? Jean-Michel Jarre had an album called Equinox.
Oh, he did? Yeah.
By the way, do you know that his father scored Lawrence of Arabia?
No way. Jean-Michel Jarre is Maurice Jarre. He's his father. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I knew that.
He's a huge composer. Anyway.
Yeah.
God, I just tried to look up BT on Google Finance.
Yeah, it's not good.
Well, but for some reason it auto-completed because I was multitasking and talking to you about Jean-Michel Jarre at the same time. And I thought it was BT, and I thought, fucking hell, their share price just suddenly gone through the roof. No, what it served up was Bitcoin to USD when I put in BT. That's what it auto-completed
do you know what happened to their share price on Friday when this all broke? It went down 6%. BT share price, and then it went down another 1%.
Off the back of a story, it should be noted that this FT story was published early February.
So I think the reason it's gone down is because of this Equinox 2 is basically BT's wholesale pricing plans. It's the fee they charge, the proposals for the fee they charge to retailers, essentially using the OpenReach network, the OpenReach full fibre network, to sell services to their customers. Yeah, and it kind of sounds a bit dodgy in a way because we were moaning earlier about them raising prices by 11% plus 3.9%. and yet they're proposing to cut the fees they charge to to their sort of wholesale customers. And this has been really controversial in the sort of fibre community, with people like City Fibre and some of the other companies that are building rival infrastructure. The guys that Janssen's talking about when he says it'll end in tears for them.
Yeah.
It's been a really controversial move amongst that group, because they essentially sort of view it as a form of predatory pricing.
Totally.
I mean,
I think that's a reasonable objection.
Yeah, and that I think I can't remember Greg Mesh's quote exactly. He came out with some comments about it in December when it was first circulated, about how it would kind of kill off fibre competition at an early stage, and then essentially the implication is we're going to have this desire to have a more competitive infrastructure market just won't go anywhere. We'll end up with an open reach monopoly.
That was where so I've made my point. My criticism of the FT in extracting quotes and publishing them without context, but I will totally criticise Janssen. He must be acutely aware of how totally sensitive everything to do with OpenReach is and their wholesale pricing, and how he's got people like Greg Mesh and who's the City Fibre CEO, and other people, presumably VMO2 people and all that, and all the altnets that we'll get a bit more into. Complaining about how it is a former national monopoly, and anything that's a former national monopoly will always be a semi-monopoly, unless it's really broken up, which it wasn't.
Yeah,
will always be a semi-monopoly. It's got an advantage. It owns all the poles and ducts. It's got all these ex-monopolist advantages over up-and-coming people. And so Janssen's completely reckless to start coming out with all this. Yeah, we're gonna rule the roost. We're going to beat everyone. He should be a lot more discreet than that. Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and that's why she's perked up, Melanie Dawes, and gone, well, hang on a minute. We're looking at this Equinox 2 pricing proposal at the moment, which a lot of your competitors have complained about, and you're saying things like this, and it sounds so it's going to reinforce the perception that she might have that maybe this is predatory pricing.
Massive, regardless of how the FT framed it, it's a massive own goal.
Yeah.
And you say, because I don't listen in on their quarterlies, certainly to the extent that you do, you say that's quite a regular theme for him.
Yeah, he's very sort of aggressive, but I mean, again, on Equinox 2, if I'm trying to take his side and BT's side on this, on Equinox 2, because the way I take Greg Mesh's point at City Fibre, that if you're trying to build rival fibre infrastructure, and the biggest company in the market, which dominates the wholesale sector, let's be honest, until these companies have come along, which has only been in the last few years, they've been the dominant force in broadband. The only alternative has been Virgin Media. And they're much bigger. They're much bigger than Virgin Media nationwide.
Certainly in terms of coverage, which was his point about nationwide.
Yeah, and then you're pricing your services at such a low level that people like City Fibre are complaining they can't compete anymore. That's essentially the definition of predatory pricing. Yeah, so I can.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we don't have monopolies or virtual monopolies.
But then if I'm looking at Philip Janssen's points, if I'm putting myself in his shoes and he was sitting here now, he'd probably say, well, look, we've built fibre to 10 million properties. Extreme. I mean, if you look how quickly they've risen up the sort of fibre rankings in Europe on the basis of availability, you've got to give credit to BT for how much they've pumped in. They have a higher. I mean, I'm sympathetic. Operators often moan about how much they're spending, and we need a fairer deal from regulators.
And that's where you get all this Netflix to chip in type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, but on capital intensity, which is CapEx as a percentage of sales, they're spending about 25% of sales at the moment on capital expenditure, which is much, much higher than any other company in Western Europe, any other operator in Western Europe. The range is normally between 15 and 20%. BT's on 25%. It's building, they call it building fibre like fury, which is kind of, a gimmicky language, but they have really rolled out very, very quickly.
Chased the alliteration a bit on that as well.
And if they're going to make this. So if Ofcom, not Ofcom, but above that even, if the government and authorities feel it's necessary for us to have a nationwide fibre network for economic reasons, which they do, this is the big thing in Europe, isn't it? And worldwide, actually, you need high speed, you need it for strategic reasons. We're going to be left behind economically if we don't have it. Then you need BT to do that because other people aren't doing it. What's City Fibre's rollout objective by the mid-20s? 8 million. That's not nationwide. How many have they passed so far? 2 million.
Right.
They're way behind, and they're the second biggest. Virgin Media.
Well, and I've just got FTTH, and I'm sure it's not a coincidence that it's from BT that I've got it.
Yeah. So for Virgin Media, which is the other one talking about fibre, is doing nothing. They're not doing anything till the late 2020s. They're just sweating their cable, basically.
Right.
Their fibre footprint's tiny. And then you have people like the kind of guys that, Pierre's suddenly interested
won't name explicitly.
But people like that, like Community Fibre or GigaClear or GigaNet or Jurassic Fibre or all these other companies that are options for you to. They're community based. They really are. And a lot of them haven't even done anything so far. It's all planning.
So that's the other thing about some quotes of his from that FT article that got flagged up that I don't think either of us mentioned is him. I'm just looking back to the piece. Him basically implying that a lot of those altnets are fucked. I wish he'd said that. That would have been cool. Wouldn't
they're
it?
just not. They're just not. The trouble with if this is a problem that Ofcom has is if it comes along and goes Equinox 2.
That's it. The end in tears bit.
Yeah,
that was in reference to all those altnets.
It was. It's in reference to the altnets. That's what he means. And
so that was in the headline.
City Fibre being included in that. Although I don't think it will end in tears for City Fibre. I think they're too above that bunch. But I think the problem that Ofcom's got is that if it goes Equinox 2, no, it's anti-competitive. We don't like it. What they're essentially doing then is making it life even harder for their for the country's main fibre investor, which isn't in very good shape at the moment anyway, because it's spending its free cash flow went down by something like 80% or 90% last year compared with the year before, because it's pumping so much money into fibre. It's heavily regulated as it is. It can't shut down older platforms, by the way. This is the other thing, until it moves people onto these fibre lines. So it needs. This is the thing.
The last thing that the press event we went to when Neil McRae was still at BT, they were talking a lot about the obsolescence and shutting stuff down.
This is why it wants to lower prices. I think is you can pitch it as it's trying to drive other it's predatory pricing. It's trying to sort of stymie the competition. But I think if I'm putting myself in the BT CEO shoes, one reason they want to do it is that they need to get people onto these lines. At the moment, fibre take-up, so percentage of people who actually use a service where it's available on BT, on Openreach, full fibre is 28 or 29%. So most of this fibre is not used. Most of this fibre up and down the country is there, and it's not being used.
So people could do what I did, which is all they got to do is get an engineer for an afternoon, have a line, drill a hole.
But people haven't done that.
People aren't doing it.
And
maybe that's one of the reasons I got that good deal. Maybe that's one of the reasons that chap was so healthy. Maybe he's incentivised to upsell me to FTTH because they thought, fucking hell.
Well, they're incentivised, and the idea with Equinox 2 is it incentivises the retailers more, because if it makes it cheap for them, then they've got more of an incentive, instead of pushing older broadband products, to actually try and upsell the full fibre stuff.
I completely agree with your analysis just now. If you don't mind, I'll just read the final paragraph of my piece that I wrote, which was headlined "Ofcom hints at Openreach pricing pushback," and which featured analysis of that FT piece and all that stuff.
Yeah,
and the subsequent. I mean, we can get into it or not. We might not have. Actually, we probably haven't got time. We could get into the correspondence that they published between Janssen and Dawes, but maybe not. Anyway, my final paragraph, I said, one of the main jobs of regulators is to balance the short-term interests of consumers with the long-term health of the overall market. Allowing Openreach to dramatically drop its prices would result in lower consumer prices and/or higher ISP margins in the short term, but could eventually drive competitors out of the market, with the resulting monopoly harming consumers. But then the point I made is Ofcom's had the data, i.e. the data. So basically, there probably is a mathematical optimum point for Equinox 2 pricing, where it's just low enough that it gives consumer benefits, but not so low that it abuses a pseudo-monopolistic position to drive the likes of City Fibre or the altnets out of business.
I think it's hard to say, though, isn't it? Because it all depends on the business models that these companies have, and they're always going to complain it's too high. That's what they do.
They always complain. But so my point, in my final sentence, I'll read my final sentence and explain it. I said, Ofcom has had the data for 3 months and should focus on that, not eye-catching headlines. So my main point is, I don't think Dawes should have read too much into the FT piece, great piece though it is. There should be a data-driven, optimal price point, and there should be ways of creating models where you go, okay, this is where, this is what people tend to pay. This is where City Fiber's coming in. This is where VMO2 are coming in. This is where the altnets are coming in.
This is why this is me sort of trying to be sympathetic towards BT. If you start making things tough for them, it's like we don't even have Equinox 2 at the moment, right? This is a proposal, and so the
sequel.
What's the excuse?
Safe to buy
what's
broadband.
The excuse for the altnets at the moment for the limited progress they've made? Because if you look at the data, so that 29% figure of take-up, I said, Ofcom's. I looked at Ofcom's its sort of communications update, and the overall figure for full fibre in the UK, so that includes the altnets as well, is only 25%.
Right.
So the altnets, the implications, the altnets are doing even worse. And then if you extrapolate the numbers, which I did, and calculate it, you've basically got 12.4 million premises at the moment in the UK. Ofcom reckons are covered. This is end of year, actually, so 3 months ago.
So covered means you could potentially get it if you bought it.
Yeah, 3.1 million of those are using it.
So that's a quarter.
And if you take what Openreach says is on its lines, it means that only 370,000 of those are not on the Openreach system. 370,000 homes up and down the country are using full fibre products that aren't by Openreach. Yeah. That are people like Community Fibre.
So
and
I don't
City
know if this is
Fibre.
what you meant to say, but that does beg the question whether the altnets or anyone other than Openreach is being as efficient as they could be.
Exactly, and let's some of the altnets might have funding challenges. It's not an easy market at the moment. But who's behind City Fibre? Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. We're not going to be too sympathetic.
I mean,
about them.
they're
the vampire squid.
Exactly. So I'm not particularly sympathetic when they kind of whinge about why have they only done. They've got this footprint of 8 million by the mid 2020s. Why aren't they being more aggressive if they think this is such a fantastic opportunity?
And
why are they doing more?
And we know that there's a lot of speculative capital coming into fibre. Not just Goldman Sachs, who are the epitome of sort of fat cat capital, but plenty of like VC and BlackRock and hedge funds and shit like that.
Yeah, but it's a bit rich, isn't it? That he's been the main outspoken person about this, Greg Mesh.
Yeah.
Oh, we can't afford to do this if they do that, and you've got Goldman Sachs backing you. I mean, I know it's not an unlimited fund. It's not like Goldman Sachs has just gone, or you dip in whenever you want and spend.
But to what extent? I mean, we know. I'd love to get
funders as
I'd
well.
love it if anyone who. If he or anyone who represents him ever listens, he'd be great to have on the pod.
Greg Mesh.
Yeah,
he would. Yeah.
But I would challenge him, and I have met him once. I interviewed him when we did a Telecoms.com live thing in 2019. Actually, I think it was Jamie that interviewed him. But anyway, no, I mean, he's obviously, everything that you'd hope from an outspoken CEO. But one thing I wonder, and I don't think he'd answer this question straight, even if he was in this room, but if he's getting all this wedge off Goldman Sachs, to what extent, when he's making public statements, is he totally shooting from the hip, or is he factoring in the needs of his investors?
Yeah.
I mean, we all have incentives further up the food chain.
But it sounds to me, because there were reports in the press a few weeks ago, I think in City AM or something, that City Fibre was laying off staff and that its rollout plans had slowed down. And I don't know how much that was verified, but it sounds to me like they maybe don't have this unlimited fund and they don't have as much strong backing from the like. I mean, it sounds like you've got Goldman Sachs behind you. You've got no worries at all.
Well, that's bullshit.
It's bullshit.
Any big investor, whether it's Goldman Sachs or if it's BlackRock or just some form of speculative capital, they're going to attach strings to it.
They have, but Janssen has a point when he says we're the ones spending most of the money, we're the ones making all the effort to connect, we're the ones doing, we're the ones with nearly 3 million customers now on Openreach lines. You've got 400,000 or whatever.
Okay.
All the rest of you added up. I mean, he's kind of right in a way, and. To me, I'm just surprised that some of them haven't been more aggressive. They don't even have Equinox 2 to moan about at the moment yet. It's not there.
No, they're trying to head it off at the pass.
Pre-Equinox 2.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Christ, if this is the amount of progress they've made before Equinox 2 comes along, then maybe I can understand why they're worried. But
I take your point. So I want to, in the name of time and all that, I just want to move it on because we've got a few other things, but we've got one other little subsection of this topic that we want to talk about, which was
Virgin Media buying.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is a Telegraph scoop.
Yeah.
Quite often the Sunday Telegraph or the Weekend Telegraph gets these little telecom scoops.
And then nobody ever reads them or notices them because it's in the weekend papers. Who sits and reads the Telegraph at the weekend? Seriously.
A telecoms trade journalist desperate for a story on Monday morning.
I can tell you there's one person in the whole country does it, and it's my dad.
Right.
And nobody else does in the UK anymore. It's a 70-odd-year-old man in Wendover reads the Telegraph on a Saturday.
Well, but then again, we're about to talk about it, so there we go. So Telegraph, and it's paywalled, so I can't click through on it and get the full Monty. But basically they said, and this will be one of those things, I mean, here's another inside baseball journalistic thing. Whenever you get a leak, I would say 75 to 90% of the time that leak is a controlled leak by someone who's got an interest in it. It's not a pure... In fact, even Deep Throat, people think of like Deep Throat, which is the Woodward and Bernstein Watergate guy. Even he wasn't a pure leaker. He was the deputy head of the FBI who will have had an agenda which is presumably hostile to Richard Nixon at the time.
People always have an agenda. Otherwise, why would they do it?
Why would they leak it? Just for the sport of it, when you could get when we could get sacked.
Yeah.
And so, but most of the time, they're things to people who aren't familiar with this term. That they are things that I certainly haven't coined this phrase, but I think it's a useful one, called trial balloons, which is where something gets leaked, so that people like you and me report on it, and then there's a public response, and then they can go, oh, okay, everyone hated that. And what it normally is, it's like a sort of prelude, it's like a teaser for something they're thinking of doing, but they can leak it anonymously, and then if everyone goes, fuck that, then they can take a step back, but there's no loss of face, there's no U-turn, there's no bullshit. And so that's what I think. I think most leaks are trial balloons. And so this one, I think, probably was one of those, probably leaked by VMO2.
Yeah.
And, in the reporting, Nick wrote up, he said, Liberty Global-owned UK Tech Cable Co. VMO2 is exploring the possibility of acquiring AltNet City Fibre, so we've spoken about both of them regularly so far. According to unnamed sources, which is why I think it's a trial balloon, as soon as there's unnamed sources, that's what I immediately assume, cited in a Telegraph report. And then he quite rightly says, as always, a generous pinch of salt is a recommended accompaniment to rumours like this. But having applied that pinch of salt, we're still going to talk about it. How viable, Ian, do you think that is as a concept of Virgin buying City Fibre? £3 billion, apparently.
I mean, I think the regulator should block it.
Right.
I think I'm sympathetic towards the Vodafone 3 merger.
Right.
There's two big. So if this is right and this is accurate, there's two big mergers on the go at the moment in the UK. One of them I think should go ahead. One of them should be blocked.
Okay, give me your reasons for both.
So I think Vodafone and 3, I think, have a very strong case that. I bring it back to the whole sort of return on capital employed being below the cost of capital for them. I think this whole kind of adherence to having to have 4-player mobile markets is out of date now. In a country like the UK, I think it would be where we've got lots of MVNO competition as well. We've got fixed line options. We've got we've got Wi-Fi now. I don't see why that should not be allowed to go ahead. I think it would be. I think it'd be a good thing for the sector, and I think it's a better way of dealing with some of their whinging and grumbling about the cost of internet traffic and things like that than actually having them charge internet.
Well, that's the ultimate solution to some of that, fair contribution stuff, is just allowing them to consolidate.
Having said all that, I can understand why people are going to be worried, because it's going to lead to job losses. Prices have already gone up a lot, So
and three-player market's only one away from a duopoly, which is only one away from a monopoly.
So it's not like this is a sector that's easy to break into and to have new competition. We always end up with the same companies year after year. I wrote something else on that this week. So I'm not wholly enthusiastic about it, but I think there's a strong case to be made for allowing it to go ahead.
Okay.
Maybe with some conditions, but not conditions like, here's some spectrum for a new entrant to come along and sell them a load of network stuff as well, and then they can.
Okay.
I think the City Fibre Virgin Media deal, I think, just is quite odd at a time when you've got. I mean, I think there needs to be consolidation in the fibre market. Some of these really tiny companies that have 200,000.
Even people like a really fun guest we had on the pod, Owen Finnegan.
Totally. Well, there's already been some consolidation because they came together with 2 other companies in the same group, didn't they? So he's now in charge of a bigger beast, because they merged, I think, with Jurassic Fibre and someone else who had the same backers, the same financial backers, have basically brought 3 of them together. And he was alluding to things
Owen.
like...
What's his first
name?
Jarlath.
Don't know why I said
Finnegan.
Owen.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
Jarlath.
I was like thinking, is he
Now,
thinking of
Maybe there's
Jarlath?
another person called Owen Finnegan.
So he was hinting at things like that happening in the fibre market, where you basically stitch together some of these networks that are community based, and you have something bigger. You kind of build a jigsaw, and I think that's a good, that needs to happen and probably will happen. But I think allowing the second biggest fibre investor in the UK, which is City Fibre at the moment, to be taken over by the only other other big alternative to Openreach in terms of a sort of big fixed line network that has quite wide area coverage would be a really weird thing to
push back a little bit. To massively oversimplify your argument, you seem to be saying 4-3 is okay, but 3-2 isn't.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Well, I mean, essentially, you would end up with a sort of duopoly, wouldn't you? In a way, you'd end up with a duopoly plus a lot of tiny companies, really.
Because I wonder, again, just being devil's advocate, I wonder whether duopoly in terms of something that's even higher barrier to entry, which is fixed line infrastructure, which is incredibly high barrier to entry because it's billions and billions of pounds of investment. I wonder whether the big knock on a duopoly is obviously it makes for spontaneous cartels incredibly easily. They just follow each other in terms of pricing. Yeah. They don't need to sit in a room and twirl moustaches. They just keep an eye on each other. And they haven't even got a third variable to worry about. So that's a big argument against duopoly. But if there was ever an argument for duopoly, I'd say something as incredibly capital intensive as that.
I just don't think at a time when, and I've just been saying City Fibre should maybe be doing more, going faster and having more funds poured into it by the likes of Goldman Sachs if they're really serious about fibre and they see this as a long-term opportunity, and that you get this infrastructure in the ground, it's going to be there for 100 years. You've got the long-term yields that you can derive from that with the infrastructure fund that they have. But I don't think that having them being bought by a company like VMO2, which is not got a great reputation, let's be honest with you, on lots of fronts.
Well, they're going to push back on that.
On lots of fronts.
We'll get Sheila on as well. You can come on and tell Ian why he's full of shit.
I don't think that would be... I think there'd be a real worry about what that means for City Fibre in terms of its plans, its rollout, where
I also wonder where
there.
the money's going to come from. I mean, they didn't strike me... What are they? They're part owned by Liberty Global and Telefonica. Yeah. Both of which, certainly Telefonica, are massively in debt.
Well, they could probably drum up 3 billion, couldn't they?
I know, but it's still... Telefonica's been trying to pay down its debt a little bit.
They have, but
Liberty Global's done some disposals.
I'm sure they could find some way of justifying.
And Liberty Global's about to buy some more of Belgium. Yeah. Anyway, I just don't think either of those companies... They're going to have to do it mainly off borrowing. They haven't got the wedge just kicking about down the back of the collective sofa.
Yeah, no, they would, yeah. But I still think... they'll do the maths and crunch the numbers and say this makes sense for us.
But I always worry when a company, this happens this is a bit of a spurious analogy, like Man U, football team, was bought by the Glazers? Yeah. And it was mainly debt. And the problem is when you buy something on the back of debt, I do think it changes the incentives of the owners. So firstly, they're looking to pay down that debt. Secondly, it makes them cash flow constrained. Yeah. It just changes some of the decisions you might make. The analogy might not bear up too well because Man U are sort of playing all right at the moment. But I don't know. I know football fans, like a lot of my friends are Arsenal fans, and Arsenal had a similar situation. Any organisation, one of which is Pierre, any organisation that is bought largely on the back of debt, I think you're entitled, if you have some affection or some care for that organisation, to think, oh shit, if it's all on the back of debt, what does that mean about how the thing's going to be run?
Well, also their business models are completely different. Virgin Media is a service provider, as is BT's an odd company because it's got this Openreach infrastructure unit, which there's been a long argument that you could carve that out and turn that just into a pure infrastructure business and have it completely separate from the rest of BT. But City Fibre is that. They're not a retailer. They don't deal with end customers. They don't deal with you and me. We don't phone up City Fibre and say we want a service. All the stuff that you buy through City Fibre is through Vodafone, or other companies using that infrastructure, basically. They didn't start off as a fibre to the home company at all, by the way. They were more in business markets, enterprise markets, and doing things like fibre to the tower and stuff like that. But they're a pure infrastructure. This flood of private equity money that's gone into the sector, and on the mobile side, you see that with the towercos. The likes of Cellnex owning infrastructure that retailers can come along and, you can hang your base station on this mast and then serve your end customers, but you don't have that kind of passive infrastructure involvement to the same extent anymore. I mean, City Fibre is a infrastructure company, whereas Virgin Media O2 is a customer-facing business. So it's two very different business models to me that are coming together. I don't know how what would they do with City Fibre? Would they then say they have this footprint and we're going to sell directly we're going to take City Fibre and sell directly on the basis of that footprint to end customers in a way that they've never done before? What would it mean for the likes of Vodafone, which I think is their anchor tenant in a lot of places?
Right.
And the deal they have with them. What were the implications of that? Because Virgin Media's never been that kind of company like Openreach has, that's had a big sort of, raft of wholesale deals, has it? It's never been that kind of. It's never been in that position in the past. So there's a lot of questions to be asked about what it would mean for how Virgin Media sort of operates and.
I've got a few other thoughts on that, but we've been going on about a segment for a little while, and there are a couple of other things we want to talk about. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to move it on. But I think it is interesting. I mean, the things I'm going to talk about, and I'm not encouraging you to answer, having just said, let's move on. But I always think when you've got a company that's largely owned by speculative capital, they always want the exit strategy. And presumably Goldman Sachs et al. Have an exit price. I wonder whether 3 billion is a bit low. But they have some kind of exit price, presumably.
Yeah.
And I wonder about that. Anyway, I want to move on. There's a couple of things. I'm trying to remember what one of them were. There are a couple of things you've written that we were talking about before the pod. So just for people to know, the amount of planning that goes into this pod consists of about 10 or 15 minutes.
There was the vRAN
before
stuff.
we start. But there was another thing.
There's a Germany Huawei.
That's it, the Germany Huawei thing. So why don't we move on to that? Why don't you tell us, so we're going to do like 2 segments.
How much, Ian, how much?
Yeah, we're going to do 2 segments of about like 10 to 15 minutes each, so this is going to be quite short and sweet.
Yeah.
So why don't you summarise what you've written or thought about to do with Germany and Huawei swap out?
Yeah, so I've been writing about this for a long time, but it's kicked off in Germany recently, and I think we have to pay credit to John Strand on this. We really do, because he's,
fair enough.
I mean, we bring him up a few times on this pod, but we're
still trying to get him on. One day we will, John.
He did a report a couple of years ago, back in 2020, when the whole Huawei thing was very much in its earlier stages and people were talking about banning it from Europe and swapping it out. And John did a report showing how much of what the sort of Huawei footprint, if you like, in 4G across European service providers.
And I should say, and I hope John won't mind me saying this, John tends to, in his analysis and commentary, not be very sympathetic towards Huawei.
No, he's very anti sort of Chinese companies being.
And that's not
involved
to say
in
he's wrong, but I think it's important to acknowledge if not bias, then a leaning.
No, but this is not bias. This is not me talking about bias. This is a data report that showed how much in each network came from Chinese providers and how much came from non-Chinese providers, basically.
Yeah.
And he did this report that showed some countries are very, very heavily reliant on Chinese providers, which is mainly Huawei, because Senti's got quite a small presence in Europe.
Yeah.
And then 3 years on, he's done a sort of follow-up. He did it kind of around about Christmas time. He did this follow-up report on 5G, what happened in 5G. And I think the expectation would be that it's going to have gone down a lot everywhere, because there's been this huge pushback. The Americans have been making
driven
a
by
fuss.
the Yanks primarily.
There's been sanctions. And yet there's a few standout examples where that hasn't happened. And the big one is Europe's biggest economy, Germany, where... So his whole thing when he did his 4G report was that almost 60% of equipment was 4G equipment was kind of Huawei's 4G RAN equipment.
Yeah,
and
so not core, just RAN.
No, I mean cores. They have been involved in the core as well, and that's one thing Germany has been doing, is taking Huawei out of the core. But that's almost irrelevant
to the purpose of what we're talking about now. It's a RAN story,
and the core is pretty irrelevant anyway, I think.
No, but it's massively relevant in terms of the security, geopolitical stuff, isn't it?
Well, I mean, that's the argument of the service providers, that if you keep them out of the core, then it's not as bad, because that's the control centre of the network.
That's what Bojo tried to say.
But if RAN networks are more software-based these days anyway, I don't really see that it actually makes that much difference, to be honest with you. I talked to a German security expert a few months ago who said you could, if you're providing RAN equipment, you could still cause cyber problems if you wanted to.
Really?
Yeah. So
you could sort of drill back into the...
Because it's software, but it's still software running at those sites. You can still cause problems.
But it's not isolated. So yeah. Anyway, let's not get into it.
It's not like there's one bit of RAN software for one site and one bit of RAN software from another site.
So if you do an OTA, it's across the whole network.
I mean, you could, it's all from Huawei anyway. So
I hear you.
But anyway, the data that he did on Germany showed that the amount of equipment that's been installed in Germany so far for 5G, pretty much the same percentage, so almost 60% has come from Huawei.
Yeah.
So in other words, there hasn't been any shift away from it at all.
Right. And you would assume they'd at least be down to 40%.
I didn't assume because it's good that he did this report and brought it to wider attention, but I didn't assume because the countries that have taken steps to phase Huawei out of the RAN have made a bit of a song and dance about it. And, the UK is a classic example where we've had parliamentary sessions on it and then rules about you have to go down to nothing by 2027 and you have to be at this percentage by 2025. And then you've had operators announcing they're using Ericsson instead or they're going to do something with Open RAN. Whereas Germany, there was none of that. They basically took some steps to get the Chinese providers out of the core network, but they did nothing to remove them from the RAN at all. They just carried on using them. So it wasn't. And then they've rolled out 5G very, very quickly. Yeah. By the way, so
thanks in part to getting loads of lovely shiny kit off Huawei.
Yeah, but the problem is that if now Germany's starting to make a fuss about this and go, well, maybe this isn't a good thing that Huawei's got this huge presence. Then they've got more stuff to replace that's quite new.
The story, I'm sure you covered this, but on Telecoms.com, Andrew wrote on 7th of March, headline, German government reportedly looks to ban Huawei and ZTE kit. I think that was probably another trial balloon, but Zeit Online, a German paper.
Well, I don't think it's a trial balloon. That's from John's report.
No.
So John's done. So John has done this 5G update. It's been heavily discussed at European policy level. It's been picked up by the Chinese embassy. The stats, I mean, presumably the Chinese embassy people have gone out and sort of tried to verify this with Huawei, and they've sort of quoted the same stats back. It's never been that popular in Germany anyway, that among some political groups that there has been this kind of heavy Huawei presence in the network. And all of a sudden you've got a situation now where it's kicking off in Germany. It's like it's become a real political hot potato. I think some of the stuff to do with Russia has actually made this.
Yeah. Well, I was going to mention that, but quickly, just to clarify what we were bouncing backwards and forwards about our reporting on it and John's data, where John's data was explicitly, well, not explicitly, it wasn't named, but you and I agreed that the source must have been John's stuff, was another Andrew story from 3 days later, 10th of March, headlined, China warns Germany against abusing state power over Huawei.
That's the Chinese embassy guy.
Yeah, and I actually wrote that headline because I thought it was quite funny, China warning anyone about abusing state power.
Yeah.
But then there was a quote from the Chinese embassy, and then one of the bits of the quote was, for a long time, Huawei has operated in compliance with laws and regulations, and its technology complies with safety standards. Yeah, you'd expect them to say that. According to European data, which I think is basically John Strand.
Yes, it's John's data, yeah.
Huawei accounts for nearly 60%, so I think John Strand's numbers were 58, 59.
Yeah.
Of Germany's 5G network equipment. So that was the most interesting thing, is Strandy is... I don't know how he might have felt about it. I'd love to have him on now. Him being used...
Oh, he's delighted.
Right.
Because they've basically validated his reporting.
But they didn't name him. But yeah.
No, but he's kicked off this conversation, basically, because he did this data report, and it's like... He's quite good at lobbying himself and promoting himself.
God knows we know that.
And he's very much in with the German newspapers as well.
Right.
So, and they've written about this and will have been picked up by German political groups more than we will. Although I think we've probably been read over there as well, because it's not like it's had super wide coverage, I think, this issue outside Germany. But and they've basically looked at these numbers and gone, oh my God, 60% Huawei. Then the conversation starts. Then the Chinese embassy people get involved and start to sort of kick up a fuss, and all of a sudden it's a big deal again. And it's much, much worse now in terms of what to do about it than it was when.
So your point, I believe, of one of the pieces you wrote that got some traction is you're pointing out the cost to German operators.
So this is the thing:
swap out.
60% of the 5G installed stuff.
It's a fuck of a lot.
It isn't if you've rolled out 10 5G base stations,
Right.
which is kind of what it was like
they're quite far down
when the
the
UK in 2020, when we're not going to allow Chinese vendors to be in the 5G. It was small, yeah. Like 3G had done a deal with Huawei, but I don't think they'd done much with them, and everybody was just starting to move towards 5G. You've obviously got the implications of what to do about your 4G footprint as well, because you have the same thing from both of them. But the point now is in Germany. Like, if you look at Deutsche Telekom's last annual report, they say 95% of the country is now covered with 5G.
Wow.
You know, they've got
And 60% of that's Huawei.
80,000 antennas, 80,000 5G antennas up. And then you look at so I did the number crunching. I looked at their figures. I looked at Vodafone's. I looked at Telefonica O2. So that's the three network operators. You look at the number overall of how many 5G antennas they say they've installed, and it's 130 odd thousand. And then you extrapolate from that, well, if 59% is coming from Huawei, then, and they all buy from Huawei and have a Nordic vendor in the mix as well, then you're looking at 80,000 antennas.
And then you
80,000 5G antennas.
You did some pro Excel work.
I didn't do because if you ask people how much is a 5G base station, how much is a 5G antenna, it varies massively.
Right.
But the point is, when they did this in the UK and the operators are going, this is going to cost us billions, it's going to cost, and then BT came out with a final number of about $500 million, because they said they could, a lot of their 4G equipment had been due for replacement anyway, and they hadn't rolled out that much 5G, so it wasn't as disruptive as it could have been. That's not the case in Germany anymore. They've got the whole of the 5G network to take out almost, or 60% of it, and it's in Deutsche Telekom's case, it's nationwide, and in the case of the other two, it's not that much behind that. They're talking about figures like 75% and 80%. So,
I thought it was interesting, Pierre. By the way, what are we looking at for time in terms of from here? When have I got to stop?
15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay, so I'll make this one very quick.
20.
20, all right. I'm cutting your own throat. You give me 20. You made a point about Russia. This is a tangent, but I think a relevant one. Germany, we know, has been very exposed by this Ukraine bullshit because of the gas dependence on Russia. And this seems to point towards, I don't know why, I'm sure there are good reasons, and I bet part of it is a desire for Germany as the sort of biggest economy and most influential country in Europe, certainly in the EU, certainly since we legged it, to want to just plough its own furrow and do its own thing. And basically Europe wants to be a superpower to itself, but it's kind of torn between the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere, isn't it?
The rich and the poor.
Well, they're
you what?
The rich and the poor.
But they're like an operator that only has one supplier in the network. That's
who is
Germany.
In what context?
They have one energy supplier.
Yeah,
and they have one
so that's
Chinese
what I was leading up
vendor
to.
for
That's what I was leading up to. So they obviously, in terms of risk management, massively overexposed
they buy
themselves to one
all
supply.
their gas from a totalitarian state that's now perceived to be a massive threat.
It's not. It's like 50%. It's not all of it.
They're heavily reliant. Okay, they're heavily reliant. They're so heavily reliant on Russian gas, and it's caused problems for them.
Certainly, once it kicked off 2 years ago, or was it? No, it was only a year ago, wasn't it? Once it kicked off a year ago, that put them in a tricky situation. Anyway, the only reason I bring it up is, so there they are. I mean, I've got some sympathy for the Germans. Why shouldn't they do business with Russia or China? Because I don't buy this.
Because Putin's turned off the taps, mate.
Well, yeah, but prior to that, I don't buy this Western Hemisphere good, Eastern Hemisphere bad binary shit at all. However, having said that, obviously Russia and China have different systems, and they are more authoritarian than we typically are in the West. But what's interesting is, juxtaposing the two things, the energy reliance on Russia and the telecoms kit reliant on Chinese vendors.
Well, that's why they
seem to have made some
bad
bets.
I think that's why it's kicked off, though. I mean, I think the energy reliance on Russia, personally, I think is a bigger problem than the... Yeah. I mean, that's clearly a big problem. I don't think that should ever have been allowed to happen, frankly.
By who? What do you mean allowed?
Allowed to happen.
Who allows these things?
Germany's former government, Angela Merkel, and the guy who's now heavily is a shareholder of Nord Stream 2, whatever his name is, Gerhard Schroeder.
Oh, Schroeder,
No, Scholz is the guy who's trying to correct this.
Sorry, no, I got that one wrong. I was being slightly pedantic when you were talking about allowed. I thought you were talking about some kind of
she's now the most
supranational
she's
authority.
one of the most, apparently become one of the most unpopular figures in Germany now.
Right.
Merkel, because she's very much perceived to be this kind of lovey-dovey figure, I think. But she's basically allowed Germany to become more energy dependent on a dictatorship.
And those seem to be so. So mine was a semantical pushback on what you said. I agree with you. They shouldn't have made that decision. It was a bad risk management decision. They didn't hedge their bets.
Yeah,
they allowed themselves to be very dependent on an unreliable partner.
I think they thought. I think going back to the Schroeder days, and he's a bit of a dodgy character
he
anyway.
Fucking is,
yeah,
isn't he?
but I think that maybe if you're trying to be sympathetic towards him, there was a view that they could bring. There's this idea if you trade with these countries, you can bring them in from the.
And Schroeder's now like the CEO of most of Russian
Nord Stream 2, I think. Yeah. So he's certainly involved in it. But I think, the Huawei stuff, I know John's point is, if they can turn off the gas like Putin's doing, they can turn off the networks as well, the Chinese.
But it's bloody expensive.
But for me, it's less of a, for a start, and he makes this point as well, you can swap that equipment. It's not like trying to find another source of natural gas, which is another source of energy. Where else do you get it from? You go to Qatar, you try and get renewables going, which aren't economical.
Or you get LNG off the States, which is
what they want.
Or you get LNG
off the States, but it's not an easy switch to make, whereas now it's not going to be easy in this case if they did have to swap all that Huawei equipment, but they can do it. They can move to...
But it's going to cost the operators a ton of money. Which presumably governments have to at least partially compensate from that.
No, well, the argument is that you can't because it's perceived to be state aid. If you're giving them money,
so that's where the EU will.
They're going to go and spend money on Nokia and Ericsson
so here you'll get my Eurosceptic angle, which is the EU will find a way of going, well, in this case,
maybe
just like the French years ago, they used to have a rule about how you can't. Something like borrow more than 3% of your GDP or some. I can't remember what the fucking rule was.
Yeah.
And then the French went over there and they went, they had a good reason.
Well, this is the
Whereas
weird
if
thing.
Hungary or someone had done it, they'd have gone bad Hungary.
Well, this is the weird thing is it's the EU's wagging its finger at Germany. Thierry Breton.
Pierre's pouting and shrugging.
With collaterals.
But the Thierry Breton, who's the Internal Market Commissioner, was sort of wagging his finger like a lot of countries have not gone ahead with the 5G toolbox and implemented our restrictions about not using Chinese vendors. He was having a go at them, and that speech he gave where he was also bringing up things like fair share, he had a go about the Huawei subject as well. Right. And Germany's an outstanding example of that.
Well, there we are. And that supports my point.
Yeah.
And that's my dig. I'm not going to get into that as we have very limited time and it's not a telecoms thing. But that's my biggest dig at things like the EU. Isn't the EU itself, is that you just get the impression that there's different rules for different members.
One tangent from this is that I don't think any of this is particularly good for Open RAN, counterintuitively, because you'd think, if they do have to now swap out Huawei.
But in principle, why not go there?
If they're made to do it quickly, this depends on the phasing of it. They probably will do something like they've done in the UK and say, you can have it till 2028, which is basically not a ban at all, actually. But if they did say you've got to do it quickly, then Deutsche Telekom's point a few weeks ago in a white paper leading up to MWC was that Open RAN's not ready to be rolled out at scale. So what they would do probably is switch to either Nokia or Ericsson.
I've seen you, we don't have time on this one, but I've seen you write a few sceptical things about Open RAN, which I'm sure, we've got some guests coming up who I think will be great on this and great on the topic that we're going to finish off on as well. Yeah. I think, I was explaining to people I was having lunch with, our job, people like me and Ian, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I suspect you think this, we think our job isn't not necessarily to be contrarian, because that implies that it's a sort of instinctive, reflexive thing.
Yeah.
But just to push back.
Yeah.
And ask difficult questions. Because if we don't ask the difficult questions, who's going to do it? And that's where I completely back all your reporting on Open RAN. It's like, okay, it's all really great, and the Yanks want it because they've created a duopoly by banning Chinese vendors. But is it all that? Anyway, can't get into that. Let's finish off.
No, it isn't.
It's not. In summary, TLDR, no, it fucking isn't. Let's finish off with a bit more...
Isn't it TDLR? Sorry.
No, it isn't. It's TLDR. Too long, didn't read.
Yeah. Too damn long to read? Oh,
no, it's too long, semicolon for some reason. I never understood
Nobody
the
uses a semicolon.
I know, I'm supposed to be a professional writer. I don't know what the fuck a semicolon's for.
Well, it's supposed to be like a slightly longer pause than a comma.
Well, and
it
also,
can be quite useful in lists.
It's also when one clause naturally leads to another clause. But yeah, it's badly defined. But the last thing we want,
I bet they use them in France a lot.
No, they've got all kinds of other little weird bits of punctuation.
Commas instead of full.
They've got accents going both ways. They've got cedillas.
Which is good.
It's just good. There should be an actual.
What's that circum? The one that's like a Chinese hat. Is that
like coat?
What is that all about?
I don't know. It's just like it's a deeper O.
Well, it's like the headstone of where a letter used to be or something.
Yeah. Well, like the Scandinavians, they have the 2 dots. That's also weird.
Yeah. Oh, the umlaut.
Umlaut, is that what that is?
They don't call it that though, probably in Scandinavia.
They call it a sort of purple bollocks or something. There's a callback. To, because we all like a bit of comedy. Callbacks in comedy are where they make a joke like earlier on in the routine, and then later on they refer to it. And I was saying how if you got to have a name in Scandinavian, you got to have a colour and a part of the anatomy. So there we are. I'm a stand-up comic. Okay, last thing. What was it? Oh yeah, vRAN. So it's funny. So we've left this for like 10 minutes.
Well, we're going to talk about this on a subsequent pod.
But we're going to talk about it.
To be continued.
There's 2 reasons I want to talk about it. One, you've written a good piece about it, which is the main reason I want to talk about it. And secondly, you and I have had countless conversations on and off the pod about vRAN, where you've sort of patiently explained it in a way where you're looking at me in a sort of pleading, why don't you get this, Scott, sort of way. And I do get it, but I don't. I just still, journalistically,
it's not easy to get.
I was telling people having lunch with, the ultimate question as a journalist, I think, you need to ask is, why should my audience give a fuck?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm still struggling with vRAN. I understand that if you softwareize things, then so you completely take them out of any hardware dependency at all, then that creates all sorts of flexibility, all sorts of scalability. You can put it in the cloud, you can fuck about with it. I'm just still not sure why operators want vRAN. So why don't you just tell us quickly, Ian, what you've written about it?
But that's interesting, the point that you make about why you should give a fuck. Maybe we just talk about that for a few minutes, because I think I don't ever want to write a piece that's just like in the weeds and like writing about something for the sake of it.
Perish the thought, Ian.
Yeah, so I think there's several reasons why. One way that I've tried to approach it when I've written about it is, what does it mean for the competitive dynamics? So one concern I think there is about vRAN is that if things move, and this is the slight irony of because Open RAN kind of gets conflated or linked to vRAN. Yeah. They're kind of part of the same story.
And so you wrote one piece that addressed that conflation, didn't you?
I did, but they're part of the same story, and the assumption is that ORAN and vRAN a lot of the time will go hand in hand. And the vRAN side of it...
You wrote, sorry to butt in, you wrote a piece saying, good luck building a virtual Open RAN, there's no such thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
But if you... Yeah, I mean that's something I think we probably will talk about maybe with Neil McRae when we get on that specific article.
Spoiler alert!
Because he wanted to chat about it. He quite liked it.
He's due to come in about a month. But audience.
But the one issue is that if things are going to go towards vRAN, and that's going to be a really big deal in the future, and let's say we go along with the kind of advocates who say that all networks will end up looking like that, then this argument that Open RAN is all about, and open virtualized networks are all about getting more competition into the mix and having a more diverse marketplace, to me then becomes slightly bonkers, because vRAN is heavily about using general purpose processors,
of which there are a small number
of which there's a very, very small number of suppliers.
So you wrote another piece saying the virtual RAN benefits are clear as mud unless you're Intel.
Yeah, well, I think the other piece though also draws attention to the risk of an Intel monopoly, because at the moment,
and you were really early to the Intel.
Yeah,
angle.
At the moment, I mean, you only have to go and look at Intel's position in the general purpose chips in data centers market to see how. And now it's gone down a bit in the last couple of years. I think it used to be right up in the 90s, but it's come down to sort of 70-odd%. But it's still, this is a company that has a 70-odd% market share. If you compare that with Ericsson's 39% outside China, Ericsson looks quite small by comparison, yet people are worried about that. But you go towards, and this was a point that was, now he didn't name it, he didn't actually name the company, but when I spoke to Tommy Wito in Barcelona, he said
he's the network head for Nokia.
He's the network head for Nokia. He said it's not a good idea in layer one, which is what we're talking about with vRAN basically. It's the baseband software.
Yeah, once you get into the layers, I get completely lost.
It's basically the software that you get that processes, stuff at the radio site in a traditional network. So the servers that you have at the bottom of a mast that would do the kind of number crunching and the compute stuff is layer 1. Yeah.
Okay.
It's baseband software, basically.
Do you know, I was going to say that, but I sort of shut myself.
It's baseband software.
I wish I said it now. I would have sounded clever.
The whole RAN stack's actually more as layer 1, 2, and 3 of the RAN software stack, and layer 1's like the baseband side of it. But to have only one company doing that on the chip side is not a good thing, is it?
Where's this plurality?
Where's the plurality then? And a lot of the way that I've tried to approach this is, how do we get around that? Or, are people happy with that? Is that something that they're prepared? If you're not happy about having 3 big RAN vendors, why are you happy about having one company that, by the way, has not had a great track record in the last few years of delivering on time?
Intel's having a nightmare at the moment.
They're not in a good position.
By the way, actually, I should say, I finally found BT's share price. Pierre, you were bitching about BT's share price. I mean, it's not great, but it's more or less where it's been for 2 years. And it's also slightly above where it was in 2009. So they had a peak around 2015, around about the EE acquisition. And then it's sort of fallen off a cliff since then, and then it's bumped along. But it's, I mean, it's not like they've just suddenly had a nightmare recently. We should look up Intel while you're talking about it.
I know. I've got a chart of them in one of those 2 stories that you referred to, and it's down a lot. If you look at it over a 5-year period, it gives you a good idea.
Yeah. So Intel, let's pick a recent peak. April the 9th, 2001, $68. Today, $29.
But the trouble is that if you look at that, that market share drop that I've talked about, from going down from sort of 90% into the sort of 70s range over the last few years, if you look at the company that's picked up that market share mainly,
AMD?
It's AMD. And what does AMD use?
Well, they use Intel IP, but they do it better.
They use Intel IP.
Yeah, they use x86.
They complain in their SEC filings about being reliant on x86 and how Intel has control of the x86 ecosystem.
Yeah, but the genesis of AMD. They were basically created as a monopoly. Well, I might be talking shit here, actually, if anyone's listening. But my distant memory of covering AMD more than I do now is AMD were created because Intel said, you've created a monopoly with x86, there's got to be at least one competitor.
Yeah.
And AMD struggled for a long time. When I was covering more, when I was at Hexus, AMD were having a nightmare. In fact, you remember we spoke to
which is
Rory
what the whole
Reid,
thing's so bonkers, though.
Rory Reid / Mo Green from The Godfather.
Yeah.
Don't know who ever said that on the pod, but Rory Reid looks and sounds a lot like Mo Green from The Godfather.
He does.
He was CEO of AMD for a little bit, and I chatted to him briefly when we spoke. But anyway, AMD, for whatever reason, has really raised its game, and it's kicking ass.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure if I looked at its share price.
But as I say, you've got, as you've just pointed it out, it's a company that's basically created, which is still reliant on the same architecture and is a licensee.
But there's only 2. There's only x86 and ARM, really, isn't there?
Sure, but it's better to have some ARM in there as well. Yeah. No, this is what I'm saying. Your two main companies in that mix. One of them's got 70%. The one that's picked up 10 or 15% or whatever is a licensee of the bigger one. This is not a good situation for a company that wants diversity in the network, is it?
Yeah.
Now,
I hear you.
That's a good point, that only with ARM as an alternative, even then, it's only 2 different architectures.
And you'd expect ARM to be bigger, because ARM has always lent itself to mobile.
ARM is on the go. But the trouble with so a lot of this gets back to why I've been trying to explain it and write about it, and what do you try to do about preventing Intel from having that? This is one of the reasons why the Open RAN, the virtual RAN ecosystem, wants to try and get other chip options into the mix, is partly to avoid having that monopoly that Nokia's Tommy Wito referred to, without actually naming Intel. That's who he's obviously talking about, though. Part of the reason is to avoid a monopoly. Part of the reason is because general purpose processors aren't actually ideal for RAN software.
Well, by definition, they're not optimized.
They're not optimized. So if you can offload some of it onto silicon that's more suitable, then you maybe can get around that problem. And that's where companies that use ARM cores come into the mix, like Qualcomm and Marvell and Nvidia. And the trouble then, and that's the headline, there's no such thing as a virtualized RAN, is that once you start to do that, once you start to use these inline accelerators, they're called, is the technique that you use, where you basically shift some of the baseband software gets moved onto this separate silicon. It gets moved off the GPP, the general purpose processor, onto this separate silicon. Intel's argument, and this is controversial, this is like a point of debate in the industry, but Intel's argument is that once you start doing that, you start introducing these separate accelerator cards that you can plug into your server.
There was a bit of that going on at Mobile Congress.
Yeah,
news
there's a lot of
that
it going on.
Yeah.
It's not virtualized anymore.
Right.
This idea of being able
because
to share...
Because then you're dependent on a bit of hardware.
Because then you're hard coding a bit of software to work on that bit of silicon. And this idea of having a general purpose processor that can be shared among different
so it's not pure
resources.
Software. There's an ASIC. There's a dedicated bit of circuitry, silicon that you have to do that function.
It's tight coupling. That accelerator card is only ever going to be used to support...
Yeah.
That's the argument.
So it's not even like you've put in a NVIDIA gaming card that you might use to play Call of Duty better. It's a dedicated thing that's just for that job.
It's a dedicated thing for that job. That's Intel's argument. Yeah. And they would also say that what are the other drawbacks? The idea of virtualization is you have one sort of layer, one contains as a service layer, one kind of platform, the sort of stuff that people like Wind River and Red Hat and VMware do. This is your virtualization layer.
Yeah.
And you use that to manage everything.
That used to be owned by Intel.
You use that to manage everything.
And they couldn't make it work.
Now, once you start using these accelerator cards, you need different tools to do the two things because they're sort of incompatible systems, essentially. So you're
so it's not open.
Those benefits.
It's not open. It's not virtualized.
Exactly. That's the Intel argument. I know. There's people who say it's.
But then from broader, and that's if that's the Intel argument, then great, and there's plenty of validity to it. But from the broader perspective, all these supposed virtues that come from either virtualization or from Open RAN are diminished, if not completely removed, by that bottleneck and by that hardware dependence.
Well, so Howard Watson, who I talked to a little bit about this at Mobile World Congress, said that once you start introducing these these accelerators into the mix, and it becomes more complicated, and you have some of these compromises that you have to make, the whole thing starts to become more expensive than your existing solution. Yeah. And now one of the big arguments about virtualization in the first place was that it was going to be a cheaper way of doing things. So if you end up with something more expensive, then you've kind of devised that.
And just to wrap it up, because we're nearly out of time.
This is one to return to.
We will, and we hope that friend of the pod Neil McRae will come back on in whatever guise. I don't know whether he's got a new job yet.
Well, he is coming on, isn't he?
Hopefully, we'll know by then.
Yeah.
According to ChatGPT, he joined Amazon 3 years ago.
Is it?
Do you remember?
All right, well done, Neil.
I remember that.
But no, we'll get into the weeds there, and I'll brace myself for that one.
Yep.
But just a couple of things to summarise. I think the enduring point that you've always made. I think my thing is I'm really interested in state involvement in this stuff. There's been, over the last 5 years, there's been a lot more state involvement in telecoms because they viewed it as a strategic thing, 5G strategic thing, can't let the Chinese get involved, etc., etc. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. I won't get into it now. There's a lot of pressure on TikTok right now because it's Chinese. But it's not necessarily, it seems analogous to the Huawei thing. It's not necessarily rationalised. They're just like, it was fucking Chinese, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, and there's all that. And then the remedies, when you have an irrational initiative like that, then the remedies are often irrational. And I think that's one of the things we're coming to with some of these remedies. Because they're politically driven rather than scientifically or technically or commercially driven, they can be a bit irrational. And when you and I, especially you, try and pick holes in them, it's not that difficult to do. You're like, well, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And then just one other thing, just to finish off, we were talking about AMD. If you bought, Pierre, you like speculating in shares. If you bought AMD shares in September 2015, they would have cost you $1.71. If you'd sold those same shares in November 21, you would have got $155.
Bloody hell.
So we're talking,
wow.
what?
100.
We're
talking about
massive.
80-90% gain.
What's their share price at the moment?
It's 102.
1,000.
It's still pretty good considering the
900.
chip sector.
Yeah, it fell off a bit from that peak,
Well, everybody's in the chip
but it
sector.
started going up again.
The only company that's doing well in the chip sector at the moment is Nvidia.
Yeah, but even I'll look them up quickly.
Well, they've gone
before
up
we
since
sign
October.
off. Even they have had their ups and no, they had some scary.
They've doubled since October.
I mean, certainly, I don't think Jensen Huang is short of fucking leather jackets. Let's just put it that way. He will have been able to buy. He will be able to buy all the world's cows with the amount their thing went up. So if we go all the way back to 2015, they were at $5. They peaked at about
600 or something.
yeah. I'm struggling to get Google Maps to find the peak.
It was the Bitcoin.
And they went down again, but they're going back up again. There's some weird volatility going on there. But anyway, the whole
It
time
followed Bitcoin for a while and then it crashed. And now,
yeah, because they do the graphics, the parallel processing that's good for data intensive stuff, which is obviously Bitcoin mining and that sort of thing. But basically, like to summarize, and then we'll call it a day. While Intel has been going down, AMD and Nvidia have been going through the roof. So if we'd all been really clever and we just put tons of money, obviously into Bitcoin first and foremost.
well, of course I did. When you guys did.
If we put tons of money into Nvidia and AMD in 2015 and sat on it, we'd be laughing now. And Bitcoin. All right, great. We'll wrap it up there. That was fun, wasn't it? Just us
Good one.
talking shit.
should do it more often.
I know, if we weren't so popular. I think we are doing one next week. I can't remember. I think we got someone on. Is it Ed Barton?
Yeah.
Cool. So he's been on the pod a few times, so hopefully he doesn't cancel. But if not, it would just be us. Anyway, I'll call it a day there. So thanks a lot for listening and make sure you join us for that one.